So I will give you over to Sylvia. Sylvia's been doing programs here since I started. She was very nice. She came up to me when I was a newbie here and said, I could do some programs for you. And on a personal note, it has changed my life because now I, have started to use, herbal medicine in my day-to-day life, and I think I've been much healthier for it. And then I've become one of those horrible evangelists too that bug their friends and family. Well, why aren't you drinking, the tea with the ginger and the honey and the garlic and the cayenne pepper? And then they just kind of look at it like that. So I'm so happy that she came up with another great program, and she is going to do it at the library for us today. So please give her a warm welcome.
I feel like I should be applauding all of you for being brave enough to come out this morning to join me here. And I also am very appreciative. This is my passion. This is what I love to do. What I love to do is to teach and to do my very best to give you the empowerment to then go out and at least stick your toe in the water and experiment with it, to see the possibilities. And I don't consider the morning a success unless you leave with more questions than you came in with. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to whet your appetites. For those of you who might not be familiar with me and who I am and where I've come from, I am Sylvia Newberry. I live here in Heartland. I have for 35 years or more. As a profession, I was a nurse for a very long time. I worked in the operating room for years and years until I was given the opportunity back in the late 1990s down at Mount Scottney Hospital to step outside of my comfort zone and help the hospital create a program of alternative and complementary medicine. And once the program was created, they were looking for a person to lead the program, and I said, and so I had the opportunity to do that for several years, and it gave me a wonderful, as I was expanding my horizons and learning about herbs and energy and things that were very much outside of my realm of reality as a nurse in the operating room. I was in a healthcare setting where I would come across chances to opportunities to experiment or to test the things that I was learning, and I had some really, really great teachers in those years. I'm retired from nursing now. I do have a practice in the Healing Arts Clinic that's next to the hospital down in Winton, and I have herb gardens on the Healing Arts Clinic site. There is a community herb garden, and we have partnered with the UVM Master Gardeners program to give people a chance to get their hands in the dirt and to grow the herbs. And even if they don't want to come down and actually work in the garden, they can walk through it and they can see plants growing that they might not see otherwise growing. We try to focus on native plants, but I will admit that there are some exotic plants that I dearly love that are annuals, not perennials in Vermont, but they end up in the garden every year too. So this morning, what I'd like to do is give you a little tiny glimpse of the potential for using 12 different herbs. As I put the information out about this program, somebody emailed me back and said, I want to know what the herbs are. What are your 12 favorite herbs? These are not necessarily my 12 favorite herbs, but they are 12 herbs that are pretty impressive in the way that they act. They are also relatively safe. You're probably not going to get, if you use them the way that I'm suggesting today, excuse me, you're probably not going to get thrown any curves for them. They're not going to be dangerous. And they give you a little bit of an introduction into exactly what the potential, well, maybe not exactly, what was strike the exactly. They give you a little bit of of an introduction, a glimpse into what the potential can be for working with these herbs. For the most part, I'm going to talk about one way in which they can be used, but herbs are multifaceted. There's a couple of things that if you're going to make the transition between allopathic and herbal medicine, or even if you're not, you don't have to be in one camp or the other. You can be in both camps. But if you're going to start seriously thinking about using herbs, there's some mindset that you need to change, because herbs don't work the way that pharmaceutical medicine works. Pharmaceutical medicine is based on the paradigm that there is one active ingredient, and that active ingredient has a specific dose that is probably just the right dose, and that just the right dose is sort of a one-size-fits-all. And herbs don't work that way. Herbs are very complex chemical entities. They have hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of chemical compounds in each one of the plants. Most of them haven't even been identified yet. Scientists keep identifying new compounds in the old familiar herbs. And it's not one of those compounds that is the active ingredient. It's the way that all of those compounds work together. And they work together one way in my body because of my chemistry, my health, my energetic system. And if Sheila takes that same herb, it may work differently for her, beneficially, but differently, because her makeup is different than mine is. And so we're not, when the pharmaceutical companies study the herbs, they want to identify the one active ingredient that they can take out and put in their remedy, and then they say it doesn't work, or when they study them, they study one active ingredient and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work because that's not the way herbs work. That's never the intention for herbal medicine. You're looking at a very complex system that most of us who work with them take probably as much on faith as we do on knowledge. The fact that we know that the potential is there. And it can be very complex, and today what I'm going to try to do is keep it really simple. That doesn't mean the complexity isn't there underneath, but I'm going to give you a very simple glimpse of these herbs, and on some of them I have noted in bold print at the top that what I'm talking about is specifically for this class. Don't think that this is the only thing that this herb will do, because it isn't. But for this particular class, if you're looking at something that you can keep on hand at home and that you can use very simply for when you start to feel sick, or when you've skinned your knee, or when somebody's got a bad sunburn, or you've just cut yourself on a knife in the kitchen and you're bleeding all over the place and you want to be able to stop it. But the herbs that will do that, the same herb that will do that, will do other things too in different settings. There's no way to get through even one herb in 2 hours, the complexity of it, but I'm going to give you just a brush stroke of 12 different ones. And before I start, I want to give you just a brief history lesson. The reason why in our society we have the dichotomy between pharmaceuticals and herbal medicine can be traced back to the late 1800s, the early 1900s. We didn't stop using herbs as a culture because they stopped working. We didn't start using pharmaceuticals because they work better than herbs. There was a point in the early 1900s where a group of individuals got together in the United States and it decided that medical education should be standardized. Up to that point in time, anybody who went through any type of medical training, it could be homeopathy, it could have been energy medicine, it could have been herbalism, it could have been chiropractic manipulation, any different theory of medical and health, could then hang a shingle out in front and say, I'm Dr. Jones. And this group of individuals felt that healthcare consumers were confused. They didn't know what to expect when they went to see a doctor. And that health education should be standardized. And so they decided, they created a curriculum that would be standardized, and that every medical school who was turning out medical doctors in the United States would follow that curriculum. And that curriculum did not include homeopathy, it did not include herbal medicine, it did not include the concept of energy, it did not include manipulation, and the very budding pharmaceutical industry offered to help finance medical schools that would teach this standardized education. If you go to Europe, it's a very different environment. Physicians and nurses are taught about essential oils, they're taught about herbs. Pharmacists in the pharmacy can advise you on them, they know about them, they sell high quality product. It was never taken out of their medical health experience. It was only taken out of in the United States. So what I'm telling you today is based on ancient experience, hundreds of thousands of years of humans using these very plants for health, and they never stopped working. I mean, this isn't something that's new information, it isn't something that's magic. Hopefully it's empowering when you realize exactly what can happen when you use the weeds that you usually pull out of your garden to take care of your bee sting, you know. And it's like, oh my goodness, where have I been all these years? So that's the foundation. It's not, and I'll admit, Claire, don't anybody go away with the impression that I only use herbs, or that I only use alternative medicine. I don't. I am very appreciative of the benefits of both schools of thought, and I believe with all of my heart that there's a tremendous benefit that is available if we learn how to work together. But like I said, with the two different understandings of medicine and herbs, there's a mind that we've got to learn how to communicate. We've got to develop a language that we can share, so that doctors and herbalists can talk together. Or there are some handouts over here on the table that you will want probably to follow along. That's where we're starting right now, is with the first handout, the pages that have the herbs, the pictures of the herbs on them. And when I said that you could put these in your medicine cabinet, I was speaking sort of figuratively. The aloe plant probably isn't going to, my aloe plant won't fit in my medicine cabinet, but it's in my mental medicine cabinet. Are you all, I'd like to make this interactive. If you have questions, if you don't understand, if you want it to be experiential, put your hand up, do something, let me know, because I can stand here and talk all morning, but if I haven't gotten to the source of what you want for information, it's not going to do you much good. So this is an aloe leaf. Aloe comes in lots of sizes and shapes, and but this is what we're talking about when we talk about aloe. How many of you have used it? How many of you have one and you need it? So aloe is a familiar plant. So you know that you split it. The inside there's a gooey jelly substance, and that is good for burns, sunburns, skin, any kind of skin irritation. You want to be careful that you don't use it on deep wounds. With deep wounds, aloe will have a tendency to draw the edges, the skin edges together and seal them while the tissues underneath haven't healed. And so aloe is for superficial. It's for when the kids scrape their knees. It's for when you have your hands are dry and irritated and sore. It's for sunburns. It's primed for burns. And it's as close as the plant that's sitting on your shelf. You can also buy Aloe Gel. This is 99%, it's certified organic, and it's 99% aloe vera gel, and the other 1% is preservatives. I'm not sure that you have to keep it in your refrigerator, but I do. And they say sunburn, minor cuts and burns, bites, chafing, cold sores, rashes, and skin irritation. Soothing moisturizer for sensitive skin. I make my own shampoo. I put it in my shampoo. It moisturizes, helps to moisturize and hold moisture in the skin.
Does that keep indefinitely in the bottle?
It will spoil. It will either get a mold on it, or it won't smell. It will smell funky. No, I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you exactly how. That's good. I can't tell you exactly how long I keep it. Probably longer than I should admit to.
But you know it's not bad.
Yeah, I know it's not bad. Well, that's one thing. If you're working with herbal remedies and you want to know whether it's still good, an herbal remedy should smell like the herb that you made it from. It should, if it's a dried preparation, it should be basically the color that the natural plant would be. It should smell like the natural plant. And if it does that, even if you've had it on your shelf for 10 years, then it's probably still potent. You can also take a taste of it and see what it feels like in your mouth, because you'll feel the potency of it as you taste it. So there's one. We're down one. The second herb that I'm suggesting is chamomile. Have you ever grown? How many of you have ever grown chamomile? Okay, not quite so many. Chamomile is very easy to grow. Can be grown in your garden. It's nice to get it established because it will self-seed. It's an annual. It blossoms fairly early in the spring, and then the plants, in the heat and the dryness of the summer, the plants sort of shrivel and disappear. But they leave, if you haven't picked all of the blossoms, they leave their seeds and will come up on their own for next year. It's a very delicate plant. I didn't, in all of my pictures, I couldn't find one that I had taken of plants actually growing, but that's a pretty good representation. The leaves are very lacy, and the blossoms are probably about maybe an inch in diameter, maybe smaller than that, and they look like daisies. Once you learn the smell of chamomile, you probably won't forget it. Chamomile is what Peter Rabbit's mother made to help calm and settle him down after his experiences in Mr. Newberry's garden.
So you use the blossom?
The blossoms
I buy chamomile tea all the time, and I thought this is probably silly.
You buy it? You can.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, probably.
It's a matter. It's not necessarily silly, but it's a matter of choice. You can make it either by just taking the dried chamomile and putting it into a tea ball, and dropping it into a cup of hot water and letting it steep. Or you can actually buy tea bags that have one side open that you can put the dried herb inside of, and then press the open side with a hot flat iron, and it will seal it. And so you can make your own herbal blend for teas. Or you can just take it and put a couple of teaspoons of it into a cup, or you can make it not so much this time of year. I like hot tea this time of year, but in the summer when I want cold tea or room temperature tea, then taking some of the chamomile, either fresh chamomile or the dried chamomile, putting it into a jar, filling it with cold water and setting it on the counter before I go to bed at night, and you get up the next morning and the tea is all brewed.
So you can use the fresh blossom, the petals and everything are what you use.
That's exactly what that is. There's one caution with chamomile. People who are allergic to ragweed will sometimes have an allergy to chamomile. So if you know that in August your sinuses are all congested and you're sneezing, you might want to go easy with that and start with just a little bit to test and see how you respond to it. And I would expect that if you have if it's going to be a sensitivity that's going to show up in it, you're going to feel like you're in the middle of August with your head all congested and your eyes itching. That would be the way that it would affect you. It's wonderful for calming, soothing. It's great, it's something that can be used for kids. The tea is a pleasant tasting tea. You're not going to have to hold your nose to get it down. And the other thing is, any herb that can be brewed as a tea, you can use as a bath. And so, if you've got a colicky baby and it's bedtime and you want to soothe them, you can buy these at the I buy them at the co-op or at one of my herbal suppliers, or you can actually take cheesecloth. I've also been known to take old socks and dump some herbs into the sock and tie it off at the end and throw it into the bathtub as I'm running water. Or you can brew up a cup of strong tea and then pour it into the bathtub. And you can give the fussy baby a calming, soothing, not only are they getting the warm, soothing water, but our skin is the largest organ of absorption in our body. The stuff that we put on our skin ends up in our bloodstream. So that's a good herb for kids because it's nice and gentle. You'll also find chamomile in salves and lotions sometimes for irritated skin. It will do the same thing. And if you're going to use it in a salve or a lotion, you need to infuse it into oil. And that's when it comes. Sometimes we think that the medicines that are on the shelf in the Rite Aid or the CVS or Walgreens or wherever, we picture big sterile laboratories and lots of fancy equipment to make these remedies, when in fact the remedies can be very simple to make. So if you're going to infuse oil, you put some of the herb into a glass container and you pour some oil on it. Open up your kitchen cabinet. You can use canola oil, you can use olive oil, anything that's in your kitchen cabinet you can use. It's food grade. You're going to be eating it. It doesn't have anything. Olive oil is a good generalized oil to use, but it's kind of heavy. It has a flavor of its own, and it tends to be a little bit sticky. But in today's supermarkets, you can buy grapeseed oil, you can buy apricot kernel oil, you can buy all different kinds of oils that are much lighter and are much more easily absorbed through the skin. So, and they don't have the heavy scent. Grapeseed oil is one that is really good in that respect. It has almost no color, very, very light, just sort of disappears into your skin. And when it disappears into your skin, it's taking all of those herbal properties in with it. So you can soak it. The only caveat that I would put with the oils is, in making herbal oils, infused herbal oils, moisture is your enemy. So you don't want to go out to the garden, pick fresh chamomile blossoms, and put them directly into the oil. Because as the blossoms wilt, the moisture is going to come out of them, and that's going to support the growth of bacteria in oil. So you want to at least let them wilt. I usually spread them out in a basket, set them out, not in direct sunlight, but where there's a good movement of air. Let them sit at least overnight, and the flowers will really be wilted, not crispy dry, but really wilted. And then you can put them in. And if you notice that the oil is getting cloudy as it sits, take the cover off and sit it in the sun. Sometimes I'll take this inner cover off and put a piece of cheesecloth over the top and put this ring back on to hold it on so the bugs don't get into it. But if you sit this in the sun, then the oil warms and the moisture evaporates out of it and the oil will clear. So you haven't lost the oil at this point. If you put it away on your shelf, you will lose it because it will mold, it will spoil. And that can be just part of the learning process. All of us have had those experiences as we go along and say, boy, I'm not going to do that again. So, questions about chamomile? Oh, okay. Echinacea. Now, this is one of the things that I probably should have put across the top of it for this class only. Echinacea is a plant that has an herb that is highly utilized in the United States, has been highly studied. If I recall correctly, the definitive study in Echinacea came out probably 6 months ago that said that it was worthless, it didn't work. Which again goes back to what their expectation was, how they were testing it. Echinacea is an herb that stimulates the body's immune response. But echinacea, one of the primary actions of echinacea is to stimulate the production of white blood cells in your body. It's not an antibiotic. It's not killing the bugs that are coming into your body. It's creating an environment within your body so your body can fight the disease on its own, can do it the most efficient way. So the key to using echinacea for fighting colds and flus is to pay attention to what's happening to your body. We have a tendency, I think this is a generalization, but I think it's probably pretty true, let me know if I'm mistaken, that in our culture we have a tendency to get up in the morning and say, oh, my throat's a little scratchy, I hope I'm not getting sick, and then go to work. And you come home that night and now you've got muscle aches and a scratchy throat, and you say, oh my goodness, but I got that big project at work tomorrow, I hope I'm not getting sick, and you go to bed, and you get up the next morning and you're coughing and sneezing and hacking and say, boy, I've got to go find something to take for this cold. You let the cold get full blown before you do anything about it. And a lot of that is because we don't pay attention. We're not listening to what our bodies are telling us. So the key to effectively using echinacea is to take it when you get that first tickle in the back of your throat. And you have that first thought of, oh, maybe I'm getting sick. That's when you start taking echinacea. And you start taking what would seem to you is a fairly large dose of it, and you don't stop with one dose. You take a dose now, in 20 minutes or half an hour you say, how do I feel? Yeah, that's still scratchy. You take another dose. Another half an hour, 45 minutes, you say, it's a little bit better, but it's still really scratchy, so you take another dose. And after you've taken a relatively few doses, it's going to seem strange because it's not the way you're used to taking medicine, but after you've taken several doses of it, you're going to notice that you start to feel better and that those symptoms start to go away. And then you take a couple of more doses in that half hour, 45 minutes, hour interval, and then you take a dose at bedtime, and then when you get up the next day, you take 4 doses spaced out over the course of the day, and you take those 4 doses or 3 doses or whatever, multiple doses over the course of the day, but with longer intervals between them. But then you do that for 7 days, 10 days, checking in with yourself for how you're feeling. Think about how the echinacea works. You're stimulating your body's response. You're giving it a real kickstart with that high dosing of echinacea at the start. You're getting your immune system revved up to take on those organisms. And then you're supporting it over time so that your immune system can work and get it out of your system.
So were you talking about taking it as a tea or in those pills that you can buy?
You can, however you take it, it doesn't make a difference. That's just the way that you dose. You can do tea, you can do tincture. You can tell it by looking at the outside of this bottle, unless you can read my hand scratching. This is Echinacea Tincture. It's echinacea that has been soaked in alcohol to pull out the active ingredients of it. It can be a tincture. It can be a tea. It can be a capsule. It can be a tablet.
And what would the dose be out of that bottle?
Out of that bottle, I would you usually start with, some people say drops. Oops. I overfilled this bottle at the co-op the other day, and she said to me, "You got to fill up the dropper before you can put it in there. You're going to spill it." So that was what it was a whole dropper full. The instructions on the bottle will usually say maybe 30 to 40 drops, and if you take that much up into the dropper and count the drops out, that will be about that dose.
In water?
You can put it in water. You can put it in water. You can put it just under your tongue. It's going to taste, you're going to get the full taste of the echinacea if you put it under your tongue. But there's an advantage to doing that. When you put herbal remedies under your tongue, especially those that are in alcohol, they're absorbed into the circulation under your tongue, and they miss your digestive tract. So they become effective in your body more quickly, and they don't have to go through your liver, they don't get broken down in your liver, they don't get broken down in your intestine. So if you have it in a liquid form, and it doesn't have to be alcohol, you can extract, don't look for it now, but back in know that it's there, in your handouts, there is a sheet that gives you all the different kinds of things that you can dissolve herbs in, or that you can put herbs in and they will extract the properties of them. They extract them slightly differently, but not enough to make one remedy superior to another. And there are reasons why somebody might not want to take alcohol. I mean, if someone is a recovering alcoholic and really doesn't want to take the risk of putting the alcohol in their mouth, that's a perfectly legitimate reason not to use an alcohol tincture. But you can tincture with vinegar. You can make a tincture that's a mixture of vinegar and honey. You can tincture in glycerin. This is vegetable glycerin. If you're going to go the glycerin route, you need to make sure that it's vegetable glycerin, because there's also an animal glycerin. Glycerin, put a drop on your finger and taste it if you don't know what glycerin is like. Glycerin is the byproduct of manufacturing oils, either vegetable oils or processing animal fats. It has no nutritive value to it, but it's very, very sweet. It holds moisture. You'll see glycerin a lot in hand creams and face creams and cosmetics. But you can also use it to pull out the essential properties of herbs. And you can use the glycerin by itself, but it's really, really sweet. Or you can mix it with, I mix mine with alcohol and water and glycerin. And then I get the preservative properties of both the glycerin and the alcohol, but it dilutes it a little bit.
When you say alcohol, what kind of alcohol are you talking about?
Name your, pick your choice. You can use anything. You can use wine. You can use vodka. You can use brandy. You can use rum. Part of it depends on what you want out of the remedy. Are you most concerned with the healing properties of the herbs, or are you concerned with how it tastes? You know, you can do it in vodka and taste the herb. You can do it in brandy and taste the brandy. You'll taste some of the herb, but it won't be as strong. The flavor won't be as strong. And so it's as simple as that. The thing is, you want to look at the percentage of alcohol. That is key. And I'm thinking, I can tell you, come see me at the end. There's a medicine maker's handbook there on the end, which, by the way, if anybody's interested in making herbal remedies, I would highly recommend this book by James Green. He shows you both sides of making herbal remedies. He will describe the scientific method for creating a remedy, and he will tell you exactly how many ounces and exactly how many cc's and exactly how to blend them and prepare them. And then you get to the end of that description and he will say, oh, you can use the simpler method. You can go and pick a handful of herbs and put them into a glass jar and pour alcohol in so it's about a half an inch over it and shake it every couple of days, and you get essentially the same. I mean, there's both schools and they both work. And if you haven't guessed, I tend to the simpler.
Did you say that you bought the tincture of echinacea at the co-op? It comes prepared in what, you bring your own container?
You can actually buy your own container. I bought this bottle. The bottle was $2.19. It's a 2-ounce bottle. There are some, and the reason it looks like this, they have some tinctures in bulk. The way I would usually buy it is prepared from a company if I was going to buy it. But they were sold out of echinacea. They didn't have any echinacea in stock, so I wanted a specific, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, a specific combination of tinctures. And so I bought those 3, and then I made this one to add to it. And like I said, we'll get to the plant, and I'll tell you why I did that.
Sylvia, when you were putting the tincture together, you would put on
I was doing,
Was there a purpose for that?
yeah, I overfilled the bottle, and if I don't fill the dropper, I'm gonna spill.
Oh, okay.
That's the only reason, I normally wouldn't put it back in. In fact, if you've got a really potent tincture with some of the remedies, and you fill it like that, so you've got it up really close to your dropper, the rubber will actually disintegrate from the potency of the plant. There are, I don't think I have any here with me this morning, but I have made them where I go to take them off the shelf, and the dropper is all squeezed tight together, and when you try to straighten it out, it's rotten and it falls apart. And that's just because it sat there with the energy of the plant inside the bottle, and it just brought it away. Okay, Echinacea. It can also be used externally. You can also make a poultice of it to put on wounds that are very slow healing, and it would have that same purpose. It would stimulate the body's immune response. It would help increase circulation. It's not a common use for it, but it could be used. And for that, well, you could make a tea out of it and put a compress on it, but you're probably going to be more effective if you use full fresh plant and smash it up really good so that you're into the inside of it. Steep it a little bit in hot water, and then when you've got a nice pulpy, soupy mess, you put it on directly onto the skin, still warm, and bandage it and let it stay there until it has cooled, or even beyond when it has cooled. That is a potential use. You won't see it used like that very often.
I've been using Echinacea for about 20 years to support my immune system. I am on methotrexate. I see here you say don't use it with immunosuppressive drugs. And I do use it, and I use it both as well. Is there a problem with that?
Well, the problem would be that you've got two things that are doing opposite things. If it's working for you, you know, I wouldn't hesitate, and it may not be, okay. If it works for you.
Mm-hmm.
If it works, that would be the only reason. That would be the only thing, is that you're sending mixed messages. But in your case, if it works,
But don't they have to, if she's on an MOA, she would have to tell her doctor so that the doctor knew that she was taking a herbal remedy as well as a pharmaceutical remedy, so that if there's any cross pattern or anything like that, they would be able to know.
that's always a good, but that's always a good idea to do that. I prepare myself before I do that, because I have had the personal experience, and I've had other people relate to me, that when you're dealing with a physician who isn't informed, doesn't understand how the herbs work or whatever, the tendency of physicians, and this is generalized big wide strokes. I apologize to any physicians who are here, but they have a tendency to say, just stop it all. You know, you don't need any of those. I don't understand how those work. Don't take them. When in fact you know that the potential is beneficial, or you have had beneficial effect from them, and then you're faced with the decision of what you do. You know, do you continue taking them? Is the physician that, hopefully the physician that you've got that you're working with is open and will communicate with you and will be willing to say, you know, I don't understand how that works, but
Even if the physician, you could always go to the pharmacist, like especially down in Windsor, he's very knowledgeable.
yes,
Just to make sure that they have both of what you're taking for the.
and that is very important.
I did go through this a couple of years ago where my rheumatologist is fine with it. But I was having surgery, and I was told by the doctor that I had to get off the echinacea. And I did, and I had, before the surgery, and I had first cold that I have had in 25 years. And when I was going for surgery a few months later, I asked, you know, what do I do? Because I think I asked you. And I said, because I was really sick afterwards. And you said, no, don't get off it. They just don't understand.
And it may be very well be that the methotrexate is depressing one part of your immune system, and the echinacea is supporting another part of you. It may be that they don't work on the same, but with the personal experience, that takes precedence over anything that anybody else says. You know, if it works for you, then And it isn't something that's dangerous. I mean, there are some herbs that you don't take going into surgery because they inhibit your body's ability to produce blood clots. And so you don't want to be taking a lot of garlic. You don't want to be taking, and my mind is going blank at the moment, but there's specific things that you don't want to be taking because there are known contraindications to them. And so you stop those prior to surgery because it does create a risk. You know, I think we've made great progress. I think there's a whole lot more doctors out there that are willing to talk about it today. I think there's a whole lot more doctors that are willing to say, what do you understand? What do you have for information? I don't know what it is. Who's giving you advice? And have those kinds of dialogues. And there are physicians that will actually prescribe or recommend herbal remedies. Garlic is the next one that we're going to talk about. It is just plain old everyday garlic. The physician who was my primary care a number of years ago was telling people to take slivers of fresh garlic and wrap them in a little piece in one layer of cheesecloth with a little bit of a tail on them, and stick them in the opening of your kid's ear if they had an earache. And garlic is highly antimicrobial. It has a lot of essential oils. You slice garlic, you can smell it. I mean, that's the stuff. That's the powerful stuff that's going into the ear. So you stick that release that inside your ear, just in the external ear canal, and it will take care of most ear infections. Stop the earache. So that's a very simple way to use it. Garlic is a very potent antimicrobial. It can be used fresh, it can be used raw, it can be used cooked, it can be used pickled. Raw and fresh are probably where it has its most potency. And it's different from pharmaceutical remedies in that, when I say antimicrobial, it will work against bacteria, it will work against viruses, it will work against fungi. So there are very few, if any, pharmaceutical preparations that have the combined three actions. Usually it's either antibacterial, it's an antibiotic, or it's an antifungal, and there's very few effective antiviral medicines. Herbs, on the other hand, have been demonstrated to have specific antiviral activities. So how do you use your herb? How do you use garlic? Your imagination is the limit. One of my teachers would take that whole clove of garlic and probably add 2 or 3 cloves, or 2 or 3 heads more, and chop it up really, really fine, and mix it in with some olive oil and spread it about that thick on a piece of crusty bread, and just eat it. The thing with using garlic as a remedy is you probably are not going to socialize after that, unless you're feeding your friends garlic too. But one of the reasons why garlic is so effective for colds and flus and respiratory infections is that as the garlic is processed through the digestive system and goes into the bloodstream and gets to the lungs, the active ingredient, the sulfur compounds in the garlic, are actually excreted through the lungs. They're drawn out of the bloodstream in the lungs, and you exhale the garlic. You don't have garlic on your breath because you've eaten it and swallowed it and it's in your stomach. You have it because your body has processed it and you're exhaling it through your lungs. And so you've got the most active ingredient in garlic, and it's right where you need it to be. It's right in your lungs.
Can the garlic remedy in the ear help with inner ear with dizziness?
I don't know. The center ear with dizziness is more apt to be fluid in the ear and not be bacterial. And I don't know, but give it a try. You may have fluid in your inner ear because of inflammation, so your inner ear isn't draining. You're not going to hurt anything giving it a try. You can also infuse garlic into oil and put the drops of oil in your ear. And that's okay if you're using it topically, but you want to be careful about infusing garlic into oil and taking it internally. There's evidence that, at least in some cases, botulism will grow in, the botulism spores will grow in oil. They're introduced by the garlic because they come out of the ground, the spores are in the dirt, and so they will adhere to the garlic. And when they get into the oil, they need an anaerobic culture in which to grow and prosper, and the oil gives them that culture. There's no oxygen in there, and so if you eat the oil that's been infused with garlic, you can get into trouble. If you want to flavor your salad dressing, do it with, infuse your vinegar with garlic rather than your oil, and then you can mix the two of them together and eat that.
Sylvia, you said there was sulfur.
Yeah.
So that means that someone who's allergic to sulfur shouldn't be.
No, this is sulfur. This is
Different
sulfur,
kind.
the chemical sulfur, not the medication sulfa.
Okay,
They're all
that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah. And this, I'm not gonna pass this around, but if you're interested afterwards, this is one of my favorite ways to prepare garlic. It's fairly labor intensive, but I think it's well worth the effort. I take garlic, usually in the fall, and peel it. Take the cloves apart and peel it. And you can't smash the cloves. You need to leave the cloves intact. So it's a fairly mindless activity. I sit down with a half a dozen cloves of garlic and just peel for an afternoon. And you want to not try to not bruise the cloves and try to not cut the cloves as you're taking the paper off the outside of them. You put them in a jar and you cover them with vinegar. And you all have the recipe for this and the instructions in your handouts. You put them in a jar, cover them with vinegar, and let them set for about 6 weeks. And if you're like me, you need to write the date on the calendar, write the date on the top of the jar so you remember when you put them in there. And you may see some of the garlic cloves turning purple, and that's the sulfur and the vinegar working together. That doesn't mean they're spoiled. You also may see bubbles coming up out of the jar, and again, that's the sulfur. Doesn't mean it's spoiled. You can open up the lid and release the gas if it looks like there's a lot of bubbles in it. And then at the end of 6 weeks, you drain off all of the vinegar and you measure it. You drain it off into a measuring cup and you pour off half of what you've measured off and set it aside. And replace the volume with honey. So if you've poured off a cup of vinegar, you're going to set aside a half a cup and you're going to add a half a cup of vinegar, or half a cup of honey to the vinegar. And you're going to stir them until you mix it together. And you might need to warm it up a little bit. Vinegar and honey don't always want to mix. And then you pour it back over the cloves and you let them sit again for another 6 weeks. That's raw garlic. It hasn't been processed. You haven't cooked it at all. And so it has all the properties of raw garlic. And it's sweet and sour and it's crispy. And it still has a little bit of the bite. Notice, if you want to taste it afterwards, come up and I'll give you a taste. I didn't bring the whatever to let it taste. I chop those pieces of garlic up and use them in stir fries. I use the vinegar and honey that's on them in salad dressings or sprinkled over vegetables. Shannon?
I've taken a mixture of garlic and honey and just taken the honey, the garlic soaked in the honey.
Yeah.
Do you have to worry about botulism?
Not so. I've never heard of that with a problem with honey.
Okay.
But I have heard of it with the oil.
Okay, so you have taken that as a remedy for.
Right. And that's often what they will suggest if you're using the honey or using garlic to mix it with some honey.
Well, honey also has
Absolutely.
antibiotic qualities.
It does. So that's a quick oversight of garlic. Ginger. And the part that's used is the rhizome. Ginger is one of the herbs we're talking about today that won't grow here. Well, it will grow here. You can grow it. But you're probably not going to get rhizomes that look like this if you do.
Can I go back for 1 second?
Yes, you may.
You set aside half the liquid
Mhm.
and you replace that amount with honey and put it back. What do you do with the part?
It's wonderfully garlic flavored vinegar.
Just a-
Let your imagination run wild.
Salad.
You
Okay.
can use dressing for salad dressings. You can sprinkle it over vegetables. You can do anything that you want. You put it in a barbecue sauce. Put it in soup.
Oh,
Put it in, use it as a seasoning. And you've got the benefit not only, and the other thing with the vinegar, I try to use unpasteurized vinegar so that I have all of the beneficial bacteria that are in that in addition to the properties of the herbs.
Where do you get unpasteurized?
You can buy it at the food co-op, natural food stores. If you can't, I don't know that I've ever seen. If you're going to find it in a grocery store, it would be in the natural food section.
Are you using cider vinegar?
This is cider vinegar. Yeah, unpasteurized cider vinegar. And so ginger. We're on to ginger. We're going to run out of time. Ginger, it's probably the reason I would put it in my medicine cabinet would be to deal with nausea. Ginger has lots of other properties, but it is a primary remedy for nausea of all kinds, and it's safe. You can do it. You can give it to kids before they go on the car trip, so they're not getting car sick. Young mother who's dealing with morning sickness in the early stages of pregnancy can use ginger. It's not going to hurt her. Patients, there have been studies done with patients who are doing chemo and who are struggling with ginger, and I've known of chemo centers that offer a cup of ginger tea or a piece of candy. You can buy candied ginger that's been cooked in syrup and then sugared on the outside, so it's not sticky on the outside, that you can suck on and chew on. And any of those remedies are prime remedies, prime ways to help alleviate nausea. And it, like I said, it doesn't have side effects. There's no known reason not to take it other than if you're taking it for a reason other than nausea. You can also take it for warming in the wintertime. It's a wonderful warming herb when you come in from outside and you're cold, or you've got a day like today and you just feel cold and damp. I preserve my ginger by taking a piece like this and I peel it. I've been told that I don't have to, but I peel it. And one of the easy ways to peel it is just to take the edge of the back of a knife or the edge of a spoon and just scrape it down through, and all this papery stuff comes off. But it doesn't get much of the root underneath it. You can also use a knife or a potato peeler or carrot peeler or whatever. Then I slice it, and I slice it in real thin slices, just about as thin as I can slice it. I put it in and again, you've got the recipe and the directions for this too. Put it into a pot, saucepan, and pour about that much honey into it. Pour just about that much. I pour enough honey in, probably an equal amount of honey to the amount of ginger, enough so that you can stir the ginger up and it's generously coated with it's not going to hurt if you do too much. Probably not going to hurt if you do too little either, but I err on the side of excess. And then you turn the heat on underneath it. You don't want it to be too hot. And you stand there and stir it until you're finished. You want to bring it up to a simmer. You want to let it simmer for about 20 minutes, and then you're going to set it off the stove. I will tell you from experience, you may have to learn this lesson yourself, but I will share my experience with you. Do not turn your back and walk away. That mixture will go over the top of that pan and all over your stove faster than anything I've ever seen in my life. So you stand there and you stir it. And you think you have something that you can do mentally, or you take a vacation mentally, or whatever, while you're doing it, but you don't, unless you like to clean your stove. Because I can guarantee you that that's what it will do. You set it aside, and the honey, you can see that's honey that's in there, and it has pulled the juice out of the vinegar, pulled the juice out of the ginger. And so the honey is more liquid. And the ginger has shriveled down as it's pulled the. I'll pass this around so you can smell it. I have spoons afterwards if you want to come up and take a taste. And then I make a tea with it. I put a couple of teaspoons or a couple of tablespoons of it into a cup of and fill it with hot water and add a little bit of lemon juice. And or if you're fighting a cold, instead of lemon juice, add cayenne pepper to the Tabasco sauce, to the ginger. But the ginger just by itself is warm. It will warm you from the inside out. It increases circulation. It warms you up.
How would you prepare it for use for nausea?
I would probably take just some of the fresh ginger root, or I would buy commercially prepared ginger tea. Or you can take the powder, the ginger that you have in your cupboard that you make gingerbread with, and put it into a tea bag. Or you can put it right into the cup and stir it into the cup and let it settle out to the bottom and drink the tea off the top of it. I would do it in, depending upon how severe the nausea is and what age.
For motion sickness?
For motion sickness, I would get some of the candied ginger, and I would suck and chew on it. I would do it a little bit before an hour or so before I get into the car, and I would continue doing it while I was in the car if the nausea continues. I'm pretty sure that that's the way that you'll see that it's described being used. Yeah, it depends on, and if you're nauseous, if you're somebody, a mother with, or a young woman with morning sickness, or a woman of any age with morning sickness, or somebody who's undergoing chemo, you're going to have to tailor the remedy to what they can tolerate,
I sort of friend with motion sickness, and when she goes skiing on the chairlift, or when she gets in a kayak.
And I will bet you can buy the little squares of the ginger root that are sort of soft and chewy. Or if you leave them in your cupboard long enough, they're hard and chewy, or just hard. And you just put it. I would suggest that she takes one of those and sticks it in her mouth and sucks on it.
Where do you get those?
You can buy them at the you can buy them in the grocery store. Again, in a natural food section, you can buy them at the co-op.
Does this go for herb?
Ginger,
Yeah.
I wouldn't use ginger for GERD. Ginger is heating. Ginger is apt to make that worse.
Yeah, okay.
It might not, but I would need more information before that would be something that I would just recommend across the board. Peppermint, on the other hand, might be more likely to. Peppermint is the next herb that we're talking about that's in our medicine cabinet. This is how you know an herb is good. It smells like it should smell. It looks like it should look. That's fresh, that's potent. If you take a pinch of it under your tongue, it will taste like peppermint. And peppermint is a digestive aid. It's in the medicine cabinet because it helps with digestion. It helps to prevent stomach and intestinal cramps. If you're having problems digesting a food, digesting a meal, some peppermint tea along with it. It has also been studied and proven to be effective in at least some cases of irritable bowel. And in the cases of irritable bowel, they often use peppermint oil, and you can buy that in capsules. Not necessarily, but peppermint tea is not a bad place to start. Again, there's no known safety concerns with peppermint. It's cooling if you've got somebody with a fever, a kid with a fever. The flavor of peppermint is something that a child would probably tolerate. By the teaspoonful or by the small cupful, it will help cool. But it's primarily for upset stomachs. You've eaten too much at Thanksgiving dinner, and you're miserable, and so you want us to help aid your digestion. Peppermint's the one that you want to reach for.
I take a kind of a lazy approach. I see you've done quite a lot of work to dry and grind it all up. I just cut them off and stick them in a Ziploc baggie and throw them in the freezer.
You can do that.
And then
You can do that.
put them in a Pyrex thing and fill it with water and put it in the microwave.
Don't give me credit for doing all of that, Chuck. I know where to buy good high quality herbs, and I know how to spend my time and my energy, so I will grow plants, and I will grow them primarily to help other people learn to be able to identify them and learn to grow them, but I frequently buy my herbs all cut and sifted.
Can you generalize the other mints that maybe started out as peppermint?
You could try it with any mint. I mean, any mint will have a little bit of an overlay with it. Some of them are more gentle than the peppermint.
But most mints would have the same kind of properties. Just
They would have similar properties. One of the things I was going to mention and I didn't. Do you know how to recognize a member of the mint family?
Square stems.
Square stems. Square stems, you're right. And so no matter what, there's a whole lot of plants out there that don't necessarily have exactly the same, I mean, bergamot is one that comes to mind. But you go out in the wild and you're trying to identify plants and you look at the stem and it's a square stem and you say, well, I can narrow it down, at least it's someplace in the mint family.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
When my kids were growing up, it happened by accident, but I was putting it as just a room freshener because peppermint's my favorite. But I had a cold once and I put peppermint oil in a can of water and it just felt like everything opened up. So from that point on, I've used it when I've had a cold as that instead of, what's the one that saved the baby they used to have, like this? Because I felt like I got that same. Now, is that just something in my head or
No.
did that really?
No, what you smell when you're smelling peppermint is menthol. And so if you look at the Vicks Vapor Rub or Save the Baby or something like that, menthol is one of the ingredients in it. It is one of the constituents.
It was totally by accident, but it felt good.
Hey, if it feels good, do it again. Do it again. Okay, the next herb is St. John's wort. And this has one of the caveats on it for this class. St. John's wort is known, the whole plant use, the leaves and the blossoms on it are used with varying amounts of success to treat depression, but I use St. John's wort for a very different reason. I harvest only the blossoms of St. John's wort, and some of my colleagues will harvest what they call the flowering tips. When the plants start to blossom, they just cut off the whole tops that have blossoms and buds and a few little leaves on the top of it. Because what I want to do with St. John's wort is I want to infuse the blossoms and create an oil. Now, so this is one of the alchemies of herbal medicine. You take bright yellow St. John's wort blossoms and you pick them and let them wilt overnight and put them in a jar with olive oil and let them sit in the sun. And the next day or a couple of days later you go out and you pick another bunch of them and you do the same thing and you keep filling the jar and adding more blossoms and adding more oil, and then just let the jar sit. And at the time that you stop picking the blossoms, it still looks like olive oil. But you sit it someplace where it can be in the sun and it can be warm. And this is what happens. There are little tiny, tiny glands around each one of the St. John's wort petals that hold hypericum. And hypericum is the active ingredient in St. John's wort, and it's red. And so what you do is you're waiting, you're infusing it in the oil until the plant material breaks down and releases those oils. And St. John's wort oil is wonderful for its healing properties. I add it to a salve that I make, but it's also just in and of itself for burns, for sunburn, for burning your skin, for any cause. And one of the reasons it's so good is because it heals nerve tissue. It will help relieve nerve pain. It can be used for trigeminal neuralgia, the pain that people have in their faces when their trigeminal nerve gets. It can be rubbed into the skin over sciatic nerve pain. It can be used for shingles. I have a blend that I make. I don't use just the St. John's wort oil. I add some others, but that's the base of it because it heals nerves and it helps take away the nerve pain. If you smell this, it smells. Oh, maybe your smell is better than mine is. It smells like St. John's wort blossoms. And I have St. John's wort that grows wild around the perimeter of my property. And so I have a ritual when St. John's wort starts to blossom, and that's in olive oil. I go out every morning and I have a flat basket, and I go out and I pick just that day's blossoms so that I know that I have the fresh blossoms, I know that they're open. That's my meditative time. I walk around my yard and come back in with a basket full of flowers, and I let them wilt. I spread them out and let them wilt and put them in the jar the next day. And then the next morning I go out and do the same thing. And the plant, when it first starts blossoming, the plant is very small. It might be about this tall and pretty confined. It's not. And the more blossoms you pick off from it, the taller it grows, and the more branches it sends out, and the more blossoms it makes. I said it's like the plant says, my purpose here on earth is to recreate, and I can't recreate without creating seeds. And she keeps coming and picking all the blossoms, so I'm going to make more blossoms. And it more and more and more blossoms until you've got a plant that's probably standing this high and is this big around, and that is just covered with blossoms. And I never totally strip the plant. I mean, I stop before it stops blossoming. I stop when I get my jar full, and I say, okay, thank you for your gift, and you can now rest and go to seed. And that's what it does. It stops blossoming and it comes back. The way to identify the St. John's wort plant, it has little oval leaves. The leaves are fairly delicate and oval, and if you pick a leaf and hold it up to the sunlight, there are little holes all through the leaf. It looks like somebody's taken a pin and pricked holes. And the name, the Latin name for St. John's wort is Hypericum perforatum. The leaves are perforated, and so it's a rather nondescript plant. Unless you're looking for it, you probably won't see it before it blossoms.
Is it a wild flower?
It's a wild plant. It's a wild plant. I can't. There are some people who can cultivate it. I have tried. It absolutely, positively refuses to grow in my gardens. It will grow all around my yard in profusion, but it will not. But it will not let me cultivate. And like I said, some people who make the St. John's wort oil, just as the blossoms start opening, they just cut off the top of the plant, and then they take that whole thing and put it in, because the leaves and the buds and everything have that hypericum in it too. It will grow. But that is one of my favorite plants, and this is one of my favorite remedies to make. And I don't use St. John's wort internally. I have never been drawn to use it that way for treating depression, and I wouldn't put it in my medicine cabinet for that purpose, but I would put it in the medicine cabinet for its healing properties. And you can use the St. John's wort oil by itself, or you can mix it with aloe and lavender, and get the properties of all three of those if you've got a sunburn that needs to be treated, or you've poured hot water over your hand or whatever.
So if it's good for healing nerve tissue, would it be good for frostbite?
It might very well be. It might very well be. I have not used it that way, but it might very well be. Especially if it's painful, it will help soothe the nerve endings. The next one we're going to move along here, because the clock is ticking, is plantain. Plantain is one of those nuisance plants that you dig out of your yard and pull out of your garden until you realize what the potential for plantain is. And then, at least I have an entirely new respect for it. And the primary reason why I use plantain and add it into my remedies is its properties to draw. It will draw, if you take plantain and put it on as a poultice, as an oil, you will, or use it, in just a minute I'm going to explain a way to use the tincture. It will draw out things that don't belong there. It will draw out splinters. I mean, it will literally draw splinters right out of the tissue. It's an amazing first aid for a bee sting. Last summer I was doing an herb walk down at the garden at the Healing Arts Clinic, and I picked up the leaf of a lungwort, and there was a yellow jacket's nest in the ground, or a white butt hornet's nest in the ground under the plant, and as I picked up the leaf, I got stung. Very angry hornet. And I looked around the yard and went and grabbed a plantain leaf And I made what's known in herbal medicine as a spit poultice. I took the leaf and I put it in my mouth and I chewed it to start to break down and release the properties in the plantain. And then I smacked it onto the back of my hand where, like right here that I've gotten stung. And so I put the poultice on the back of my hand and we went on with the herb walk. I am highly sensitive to bee stings. In my expectation when I get stung by a bee is that, you know, I'm swollen at least up to my elbow and red and hot, and it lasts for days. And I walked around for probably the next half an hour, 45 minutes with that poultice on the back of my hand. And when I took it off, you couldn't see where I'd been stung. And I never could see where I was stung. It didn't even itch. I did it again. I had had a repeat performance a little bit later on in the summer. And it had exactly the same response to it. The sooner you get the plantain on it, the quicker it will. The less the venom has penetrated into your tissues, the more effective it will be in drawing it out. So mosquito bites, any kind of insect bites,
Bite ticks.
Poison ivy? I've heard of
not,
poison
well,
ivy.
poison ivy, that's not the prime remedy for poison ivy. It might work for poison ivy, but it's not the prime remedy for poison ivy.
Does that like to grow in your garden?
Does plantain like to grow in my garden? Plantain grows anywhere. Plantain has an interesting history, and I think that's part of why I'm drawn to it too. Plantain is not native to New England. Plantain is not native to North America. Plantain was brought by the European settlers to North America because they valued its nutritional value. It's very high in protein. It doesn't have a flavor that lends itself to my palate, but in a pinch, if I was really hungry, it's a good source of protein. But it was also a very valuable medicine for them. So they brought the seeds and the plants with them, and they planted it in this country. And then the Native Americans nicknamed it white man's footsteps because every place the settlers traveled across the United States, you could track where they'd been because there was planting. They hadn't done any planting there before the white man got there, but there it was. And they would bring it and plant it. They would plant gardens full of it so that they had it for its healing. And that boggles my mind. I grew up with plantain. It's been around it. I can't remember not having plantain in my life.
Are there any other plants that look like plantain that you might
No.
mistake?
Plantain is very distinctive. You're not going to mix it up with anything else. The leaf, it will change the way it looks based on the conditions under which it's growing. It can be very small, the leaves can be very small, it can be very down close to the ground, or it can have leaves that are this long and this wide and be huge. If it's growing in a place that's very fertile and it's not getting constantly mowed off or trunked down. But it's very characteristic that the ribbing of the leaves, it doesn't have a central stem that goes up through it. Each leaf has a stem that comes down and attaches to the plant at the ground level. It's very stringy, very tough. That's one reason why chewing it is a good way to break it up, because it's not something that you can really squeeze and get to break up.
If you don't mow it, doesn't it send up a spike?
It does, and do you know what the spike is, what the seeds on that spike are? They're the psyllium that is in Metamucil, and it's the fiber that, and people actually cultivate, there's actually an industry that cultures it, grows it to harvest those seeds. So
Can you repeat again, please?
it's psyllium.
So when you mow it, the way
No, it
I
has nothing to do with
understand
mowing. It has not mowing it and letting the seed spike come up,
Okay.
the little skinny little seed spike come up in the middle of it.
Are they purple?
Some of them might be, but they don't have to be.
The purple flower though.
There's not a really distinct flower. It's a almost a scaly looking stem. It looks just like.
It
I'll find
starts off green
find
and
a
then it
picture.
gets redder as it gets older. Something like
There
that.
are some variations in it, so you'll see some of it that's more purple, and some of it's a very distinct green. There are two distinct varieties that you'll see growing around here. One is a narrow leaf, and one is a broad leaf. The properties of the plants are very similar, but the shape of the leaf is different. You'd still recognize it as plantain. Plantain, if you want to, to learn to recognize plantain, go someplace where somebody has worked up and just seeded a new lawn. And the first plant that will come up in that new lawn is plantain. And of course, that's not what people want there. Plantain grows where land has been disturbed. If you go find a place of old growth forest where nobody has disturbed the land for hundreds of years, you will not find plantain in an old growth forest. Plantain is an indication that the soil has been disturbed, that it needs to be healed.
Flower garden.
You're constantly cultivating it. If it's in a field that is not routinely cultivated and the soil is in good health and good balance, you will not find plantain.
Is there any way of saving it so you might get stung and it's not the middle of the summer?
You can find it. I mean, it's hard
Well,
to
let me
imagine
imagine
not
now.
being able to find it. Well, now it's dried.
You can save
It's
it.
dried.
Okay.
Yes, this is dried. And if you want it for a plantain in case of bites or stings, I would suggest that you put it in a tea bag, and that you keep the tea bag in your medicine cabinet. And if you need a plantain poultice, that you drop that sucker into a cup of hot water and put the tea bag on and it will have that same drying property. I have a funny story about plantain that was, I was in the process of a herbal apprenticeship with Rosemary Gladstar up in East Barry, and one of my co-apprentices that summer was a woman who worked as an herbalist down in Virginia, or not Virginia, North Carolina. And she and her husband had a farm where they raised beef cattle, but they were totally grain-fed, organic grain-fed, or grazed beef cattle. And they had one of the town characters worked for them, and sort of had a mind of his own, unlike any of us from New England. And she was called away a couple of towns away to see somebody for herbal issues. And as she was driving, her cell phone went off, and so she picked it up. And her husband said, "Tom, whatever his name was, we'll call him Tom for this purpose. Tom is sitting here with me. We were out driving fence posts. They were creosote-treated fence posts." And he's got a big splinter in the fleshy part of his hand, right by his thumb, and I can't get it out. And she said, it's going to be hours before I'm home. Tell him to go out and find a plantain plant and to take a couple of leaves and chew it up and to poultice it on there and to wrap it with a couple of plantain leaves and put a glove on over his hand to hold it there. And I'll see him tomorrow morning when I get home. And her husband said, okay. And she got to the town that she was going to, and before she got to where she was going, her cell phone went off, and it was one of her neighbors. And she's Mary, and she says, "Tom's sitting at my kitchen table, and he's got a splinter in the palm of his hand, and we can't get it out." She said, "I've been digging and digging, and I can't get it." What do we do? She said, "I've already told him, go outside, find some plantain leaves, chew them up, put them on there, wrap it in plantain, put a glove on, I'll see him tomorrow morning." And this happened like 3 or 4 other times. He made the rounds of the neighborhood, checking everybody's opinion. And she got home that night, and the next morning, bright and early, there was a knock on her door, and she opened it up, and there was Tom. And she said, "Well, are you here for me to look at your hand?" And he said, "No, I'm here to work with your husband." She said, "Well, what's going on with your hand?" He said, "Oh, my hand's not anything." He said, I've got a couple of plantain leaves. He said, "When I got up this morning, there was the splinter sitting right out there, right on top of it." So I had to take it up. But he had to get everybody's opinion before he did it. And it really does work there.
Have you ever used the the stem?
Do I ever juice them? I don't.
The psyllium.
Well, the psyllium, what you would do is you would dry them, and you'd strip the seeds off and then dry them. It's the fiber of the seeds that you want. And no, I have never done that. And I've never seen anything. I'm sure that you probably could, but I've never seen somebody could do that. So that's plantain. I do infuse plantain into oil and put it as part of my salve. I have a healing salve that I make that is a combination of herbs and essential oils, and plantain is part of that. It's specifically for the drying purposes. You can make, in fact, you can find sometimes, in natural health food stores, you can find plantain salve. It's just plantain in it, specifically for the drying. But if you find any ointment that's a drying ointment, you can almost be sure that it's going to have plantain.
So I was asking you about ticks. You said no on ticks, correct?
I'm sorry?
The plantain, no on ticks. It would just be like a sting that's already there.
Yeah,
or
I
a
wouldn't,
bite.
I
Okay.
wouldn't do it. I have not heard of it being used for ticks, but I wouldn't depend on that for a
Okay.
remedy to get the ticks down. Yeah, there's other things that you can do to get ticks.
Yeah, but what about after the tick is out? Wouldn't, I mean, if it draws out poison.
You could put it on after the
Next time
tick
I
was
get
out.
bit by a tick and the tick's out, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, well, the other, but I would add something like tea tree with the plantain. The tea tree will draw it out, but the plantain will be the antibacterial. The plantain isn't strong, it probably has some antibacterial activities, but it's not strongly that way. And if I was dealing with ticks, I would not depend just on the plantain. I would add something that I knew had some antibacterial stuff with it. Yarrow. This is not a really good picture of yarrow. Do you all know what yarrow looks like? Grow it in their garden, see it beside the road? Anybody that doesn't know? Yarrow is a good example of what in the herbal world is known as the doctrine of signatures. There are old-time herbalists who will tell you that there are at least certain plants that you can look at, and by the shape of the leaf or the shape of the flower or the way it grows or there's something about the remedy that gives you a clue as to what you might use it for, and yarrow is one of those. And it doesn't show well in this picture, but if you look at the sheet I'm passing around and look at the leaf stem on it. And the leaf stem is very lacy, very fine, and the cuts on either side, it's got feathery little things that come out from the main stem. The cuts go all the way to the main stem. And one of the primary uses for yarrow, and the reason I keep it in my medicine cabinet, is because when you get a deep cut, a deep wound, yarrow will stop the bleeding.
Okay.
Yarrow, I spent 30 years in the operating room. I know what bleeding wounds look like. I know how you can struggle to get the bleeding to stop. And yarrow is, it works in ways that I've never seen it work before. I mean, I can remember sitting in Rosemary's class and listening to her talk and listening to her tell her stories and saying, right. And then being faced with that situation and having the opportunity to try it on my own and go, oh my goodness, what just happened? And yarrow will not only stop the wound from bleeding, it will line the wound back up and line the edges back up, and it does it from the bottom up. It's not like aloe that seals the top of the wound and leaves whatever's inside of it. It starts at the bottom and it brings the edges together, and it will perfectly align skin edges. There will be hardly any scar there. And the story I have for this, it was provided by my husband, who provides me with a fair amount of experience in the herbal world. Several years ago, he was out in a boat on our pond cutting cattails, and he had a corn cutter, sort of like a sickle, and he was holding on to them and cutting them down under the well. And I heard this holler saying, "So come meet me at the shore." And that wasn't unusual, because when he got the boat full, I usually met him at the shore and helped him get the boat unloaded. But this time, when I looked out the door, he was standing in the boat like this, with blood running down and dripping off the bottom of his elbow, holding his hand up in the air, and I went, okay. So we went down and got him in, and the first words out of his mouth are, "I'm not going to the hospital." And I said, okay, let's see what you got here first. And I looked, and he had, somehow with the cutter, had sliced down from the tip of his fingernail, corner of his fingernail, all the way down to the first knuckle, and had that flap of skin laying off sort of at 90 degrees to the finger. And blood, of course, just coming down off his elbow. "I'm not going to the hospital." I said, okay, go stick that under some water and get it cleaned up. And as I did, I ran through my herb garden on my way to the house and picked stuff here and there and brought it into the kitchen and dumped it into a cup of hot water and went into the bathroom to see what he was doing. And it was it wasn't, the wound didn't seem to be dirty. There wasn't a lot of plant material or dirt or anything in it. The pond water was questionable, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that we had to clean out of it, that you could see to clean out of it, but it really was bleeding. And so I grabbed two things. I grabbed tea tree oil, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, and I grabbed I grabbed essential oil of Yarrow. I had put fresh Yarrow into the cup in the kitchen, but I wanted a really, really concentrated form of it. And I put a couple of drops of tea tree and a couple of drops of Yarrow onto the finger, and the bleeding stopped. I mean, it stopped. There was no more bleeding. And so we looked at it, and he was adamant he was not going to go see anybody. And I said, I don't know what I can do to do that, and I'll agree to this. As long as there's no sign of infection, we won't go to the emergency room. But if we start seeing signs of infection, that starts getting red and pussy and whatever else, that's where we're going. And maybe so. He didn't want to admit that it could ever get that way. So I took the herbs that I had picked and we poulticed them onto that. I put a couple more drops of tea tree on it. We wrapped it. I probably wrapped it in a plantain leaf and then bandaged it around, and he walked around for the day with holding his finger up. And it didn't seem to be in any pain in particular. And it got to be nighttime, and I said, we need to change that before you go to bed. And so we took the dressing off, and I went, how am I going to explain to the doctors in the emergency room that I didn't bring you down when we first did this? Because that flap that was tipped over to the side looked like somebody had injected it with water. It was very firmly off to the side. It was not lined up at all. It was swollen. It didn't look like it was infected, but it looked like it was waterlogged. I mean, and the rest of the fingertips sort of looked that same way. It wasn't bleeding. It didn't look like it was infected, but it didn't look like it was healing either, or I didn't want it to heal like that. And he's still saying, I'm not going to the emergency room. So I went and grabbed one of my books, or a couple of my books, and started reading and looking and seeing what I maybe could change. And the suggestion was to use calendula to dry out wounds that look like they've been soaked in water. So we put some calendula on it when I bandaged it up that night. And we got up the next morning and took the bandage off, and that skin flap was back exactly where it should have been. Very, very fine line where the skin edges had connected. And on this side of it, there was one little place about as big as the head of a pin that was still open, and the excess water drops of water were coming out of that. And we used salve, and we used herbal poultices, and we soaked it in herbal tea. And to this day, he will say, and I have a better scar than if I'd gone and let them put stitches in it. And I say, you were lucky.